I am Eleanor Van Hoos.
I'm Jordan Ruddell.
I'm Grace Murayama.
I'm Zylena Cowan.
And this is our coach, Mr. Bill Torres, and we are sophomores at the Cottonwood Classical Preparatory School in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
All right, excellent. So we are in Unit 1. I'm going to go ahead and read the question in its entirety for you. The unit is, what are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? We have question number 3. Aristotle asserts in Politics that it is not the form of government, rule by the one, the few, or the many that matters most, but rather the ends of government that are most important. Where in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution did the framers set forth the ends of government? How did the framers differ, if at all, about how the ends of government should be prioritized? Which of the ends of government set forth in the Declaration and Constitution appear to have the highest priority today? When you're ready, you can go ahead and begin.
The very preamble of our Constitution delineates that the ends of government are to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty.
One of the matters of biggest importance to the founders was making sure that the new government avoided the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. One of the ends of government they wanted to was, first and foremost, protect the rights of the people, which had been so often trampled upon previously.
The Declaration of Independence states that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, and the purpose of this is to protect each person's unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The way that the framers handled slavery in the Constitution showed a higher prioritization of a perfect union and domestic tranquility over justice and the general welfare. The framers didn't even mention the word slave in the Constitution because it was a point of contention between the North and the South, and they wanted to preserve domestic tranquility.
They also made the 3/5 compromise in order to control tensions between the North and the South about taxation without representation. By taking these actions to preserve the Union, the founders continued to let injustices happen to enslaved people.
The very decision not to abolish slavery, which was done to gain unanimous support, put the need for the perfect union above the need for justice. This is a direct betrayal of justice and the general welfare.
During the ratification process of the Constitution, two major factions emerged, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. These two factions had widely differing ideas on what the ends of government were, and more importantly, the means to those ends.
Grace, you've accidentally muted yourself. We're going to give you a little extra time. So Grace, back up a little bit. And John, you'll give extra time.
During the ratification process of the Constitution, two major factions emerged, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. These two factions had widely differing opinions on what the ends of government were, and more importantly, the means to those ends.
Today in America and the rest of the world, we are going through some very devastating times. Even now, it seems that people have differing opinions on what the true ends of government should or should not be.
For some, it's freedom and being able to do whatever they deem necessary despite the general welfare. For others, it's protection, and those who prefer protection have to give up some of their bits of freedom in order to be protected.
A big debate right now is whether the government, state or local, is overstepping their bounds in the ends of government. In order for a good and widely accepted end of government to occur, there must be a balance between the ideas of civic virtue and natural right.
As Aristotle dictates in Politics, it is evident that the form of government is best in which every man, whoever he is, can act best and live happily. While this is true, and we trust each other through the idea of a natural social contract, humans are selfish. This is reflected in our world today. With the coronavirus being a major impact on our world, during these times, we blur the line between civic virtue and natural rights.
You need to unmute yourself, Jordan.
Why is it not? Okay. Those who value freedom over safety are protesting and standing up for their freedom being restricted. being restricted by the stay-at-home orders. Despite the orders being made for the intention of protecting everyone, others who value life over freedom are content with giving up some of their freedoms in order to protect themselves more from these threats.
In our state, New Mexico, we put down a stay-at-home order very quickly after the first 100 positive cases. This order passed through Easter and prevented churches from congregating on that Sunday. Legacy Church, based in Albuquerque, launched a suit against the state for violating their First Amendment right to the freedom of religion.
This misses the point of both the order and the First Amendment because the order does not have any religious or irreligious intent behind it. Rather, its purpose is to protect the common good. Despite all of us having different opinions regarding the ends of government, we all care and we are supporting each other in these times.
Ultimately, we can all agree that the three most important roles of government are to ensure the people's happiness, protection, and freedom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, folks. We'll go ahead and I'll ask you the first question, okay? So the question I have for you is, for the founders, one of the ends of a federal republic is avoiding the most common faction, that between the rich and the poor. How effective has the US Constitution been in this regard?
I believe that we've done a decent job of being able to not have this class divide. I know with the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, different classes tended to pick a side, while those who lived in cities and tended to be wealthier sided with the Federalists. Those who were smaller town folk sided with the Anti-Federalists. And I think now we have more diversity in political parties. However, I do believe that we do have this sort of dwindling middle class.
On top of that, the current Constitution doesn't really deal too much with things that would really affect either side incredibly, other than perhaps the 3/5 compromise. However, the direction in which we should change the Constitution, as we see with the Federalist, anti-Federalist debate, did generally show a more classist divide.
So let me ask you about some of the changes that particularly some of our state governments have made in the progressive era, the last 75 years or so. We've added to some state constitutions initiative, referendum, and recall. And there have been other progressive changes to government too. Would Aristotle have approved of these changes, or would he have disapproved of these changes? Why or why not?
I believe that he probably would have approved of some of the changes, like trying to get more people involved using the referendum and trying to limit corruption using recalls, because of the idea that the government should be self-governing to an extent.
Okay. You talked about the division among the framers of the Constitution over the ends and the means of government and the balancing the civic virtue versus natural rights. Who among the framers of the Constitution would you say most advocated for a natural rights understanding of the ends of government, and whom would you give credit for advocating most strongly for civic virtue? Who are some? Can you give me some examples of the individuals and what point and their differing points of view? For example, would he be focusing mostly on protecting natural rights, or would he be focusing mostly on the advance of civic virtue and the common good?
Hamilton was far more of a authoritarian than others like Jefferson. Jefferson was far more into the idea of having natural rights, and the an example of this is how I mean today we have these lockdown orders to stay at home and whatnot, and people believe that they are devaluing their liberties and freedoms. However, on the side of civic virtue, it was everyone forcing themselves to stay home, or the government, which Hamilton would have approved of, shows that we are far more looking at civic virtue rather than natural rights. However, and so someone like Hamilton would have approved of some of these changes, some of these orders.
Do you think our current, the way we currently handle matters relative to the federal government, do you think the current separation of powers framework works as the founders would have intended, or has one branch or another gained supremacy over the other branches? And how should we go about dealing with that problem, if it is a problem?
I definitely think that the founders initially wanted the Congress to be the strongest branch, but over time, the strongest branch has slowly become the executive branch instead of Congress. And I think that that can be sometimes problematic, because since the executive branch has only one person in charge, it is getting closer to a monarchy, which is something the framers very strongly wanted to avoid.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
We'll move into our feedback, and I'll go ahead and give you a little feedback before I turn it over to my colleagues. I think one of the things that I really liked about your presentation today is that you were interested in a conception of justice that was related to natural rights that were denied. So your examples regarding slavery, the 3/5 clause, et cetera, were interesting to me. I think that you might have elaborated that a little bit more in depth in terms of what justice then means, right? Like, because terms like justice, the common good, right? Civic virtue, these are really big, broad terms that are defined in different ways by different folks. And so I think that's a place where you could have even given greater depth to your response. But overall, I thought it was a really nice approach. And I also liked your continual work on distinguishing the kind of trade-offs between order, liberty, and equality, particularly as they're playing out in our contemporary society. And I also appreciate all of your efforts to work with us through Zoom. So thank you all.
So I particularly enjoyed your response to my question about separation of powers. This is an area of concern. This was an area of concern for the founders. And I think they would be, and as you've correctly observed, the executive power has become increasingly centralized. And I think the founders would be surprised by this, because I think they anticipated that the legislative branch would be robust. And the reality is, over many years, over many decades, many administrations, many different parties in control of Congress, Congress has been willing to give away that power to the executive. And this is true at the state level as well. And complex reasons for that, but it's a really interesting phenomenon. And you can argue that we are at variance with the founders somewhat here as a result of some of those developments. On the question that I raised about the progressive era, you clearly understand what the importance of initiative, referendum, and recall were, and why they were adopted, and to empower people. I think that Aristotle would have been pretty concerned about all that direct democracy stuff, but he isn't here to ask us, and we just have to do our best interpreting what he wrote 2,500 years ago. So I really enjoyed your presentation. I thought it was quite good. Thanks very much.
Oh, Tandy's frozen.
Tandy, are you frozen?
I bet if we give him a minute. I'm drawn to a Frosty the Snowman reference.
Well,
How are we doing on time, John?
we're okay.
Okay.
So it looks as if he's going to be logging back in. And I will, let's see. Well, actually, Bill, there he is.
Tandy, you're on mute.
Instrument. Am I unmuted?
There you
No,
go.
you're fine now.
And I'll just, I'm not, try to conclude very quickly. I appreciated very much that your focus on the beginning on the preamble, and then your suggestion that they didn't do a very good job of living up to the preamble. They failed repeatedly because they refused to struggle with the issues of slavery and individual rights. And rather than let justice roll down like waters, they let injustice continue in a great reservoir, which came very near to destroying us. It's important to remember that individual founders and framers did advocate for one side or the other. But Hamilton and Jefferson hated each other, and even while they were members of Washington's cabinet, were at daggers with each other over precisely these issues. But I enjoyed our conversation. It was a wonderful way to be able to talk about these things. So thank you very much.